see, how do I want this office to look? There, I have Will Scarborough behind me. I think that's appropriate.
Hello. Thank you all for attending Kane's keynote presentation. As you learned at the business meeting last week, due to the generous bequest of Dr. Rudolph Maschi-Antonio, Kane is in a position to set up a new scholarship for equity in classical studies. As president, I appointed an ad hoc committee to decide the nature and name of that scholarship. That committee, headed by Peter Barrios Lech, selected Ms. Helen Maria Chesnut as the right person to give her name to this scholarship. This special session, featuring Michele Valerie Ronick and her groundbreaking research, is designed to inform us all about Ms. Chesnut, her achievements, and her legacy. Before I introduce Professor Michele Valerie Ronick, who will present the keynote presentation, I invite Professor Rebecca Worsham, Assistant Professor of Classical Languages and Literatures at Smith College, to offer a few words about Ms. Chesnut in light of her connections to Smith College. Rebecca's primary area of research is Bronze Age Greek archaeology, and she co-directs fieldwork at the early Mycenaean site of Malthi in southwestern Greece. At Smith, she teaches a range of courses in Greek art and archaeology, Latin, and ancient Greek. Currently, she is working on publishing the results of the survey and excavation at Malthi, as well as a monograph on Middle Bronze Age domestic architecture in mainland Greece. Take it away, Rebecca.
Thanks, Teresa, for that introduction. And thanks for having me here today on behalf of the Department of Classical Languages and Literatures at Smith College. I'm so happy to be able to take part in this celebration of Helen Maria Chesnut, classicist, teacher, author, and one of the first Black graduates of Smith. I first encountered Helen Chesnut not long after I started working at Smith, especially through the work of Michele Ronick, but also through Pamela Foster and, of course, Smith's archivist, Nancy Young. I was fortunate enough to be able to do some of my own research on Helen's life, her experience as a Black student at Smith at the turn of the century, and especially her work in Latin pedagogy. While I wasn't able to find much information on my own, her voice, her clear skill, and her passion for teaching come through loud and clear in her Latin textbook and the article she produced about her time at Central High School in Cleveland. I was particularly struck by a passage from the biography she wrote for her father, Charles Waddell Chesnut. There she recounts going through her father's papers, remarking that, quote, "This record of my father's life ought to be preserved to serve as an inspiration to other young people who find life difficult and challenging," end quote. Just so should Helen Chesnut's inspiring legacy be preserved, and it's an honor to be here today to take part in the celebration of her life and work. So thank you for this, and thank you. I'm looking forward to the lecture.
Thank you. I needed to unmute there. All right. Thank you very much, Rebecca. So it is now my great pleasure to welcome our keynote presenter. Michele Valerie Ronick is professor in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages, Literatures, and Culture at Wayne State University in Detroit. Since the 1990s, she has been a pioneer in the study of classical influences upon people of African descent and their achievements within the discipline of classics. Relevant to those studies, she has published more than 100 books, book chapters, articles, and reference articles. Her groundbreaking monograph, The Autobiography of William Sanders Scarborough, An American Journey from Slavery to Scholarship, with a foreword by Henry Louis Gates Jr., is still a top-selling book on education history. In 2003, she assembled a photo installation entitled 12 Black Classicists with funds from the Loeb Foundation that has been displayed more than 50 times throughout the nation. Professor Ronick has also published on a number of other topics relevant to our discipline, the philosophical works of Cicero, Roman poetry, and connections between classical texts and 18th century American writers. She has been widely recognized for her work. Macon, Georgia, William Scarborough's birthplace, gave her the key to the city in 2006. The Bibb County, Georgia Commission offered her a proclamation of merit in 2006, and her hometown of Sarasota, Florida, named March 12th, Michele Valerie Ronick Day in 2005. Moreover, Professor Ronick has received many prestigious awards and grants, including the SES Outreach Award in 2007 and the newly inaugurated Ambassador Award from the Southern Conference on African American Studies in 2019. Today, Professor Ronick shares with us her presentation, In Search of Helen Maria Chesnut. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I've got a bunch of slides to share with you. So let me just get myself going on that. Are you? There it is. That's it. Good. Great. Okay. Well, I'm really delighted to be here with you, even virtually. I was born in Rhode Island, and I spent much of my time on the Connecticut shoreline. So I feel a little bit as if I've come back home. And I'm delighted and hope that in the audience, Colleen Morris, Carol Morris, Charles Morris, and Craig Vanderveer are there, who are descendants of Ethel Chesnut, Helen's sister, who's the second Black graduate of Smith College. In April 2005, almost 16 years ago to the month, I presented my first effort to trace the career of Helen Chesnut at the 101st annual meeting of the Classical Association of the Middle West and South. And I have learned a great deal more since then, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. So let's start with Helen's parents. Wait a minute, hold on. I just got to, here we go. Everyone can see, I hope. We'll start with her parents. Susan Perry, a teacher who was from a well-established family in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Charles Chesnut were married on June 6, 1878. She was 4 days from her 17th birthday, and he was just shy of his 20th birthday. He was a consummate autodidact and was constantly reading and working on self-improvement. He studied German, French, and Latin on his own, and with his meager salary, hired a tutor for Greek who was a graduate of Davidson College named Hodge. From 1877 to 1883, he worked at the Howard Normal School in Fayetteville, where he was principal for 4 years. In 1880, he started a Latin class held at his home, where 10 men and women met twice a week in the evenings. Each paid $1 a month, which turns out to be about 14 cents a session. Next photo, let's see, there we go. Oops, I went too fast, hold on, there we go. 3 of their children were born in Fayetteville, Ethel in 1879, Helen in 1880, and Edwin. And that's Ethel, Edwin, and Helen is on the right of this photograph here from the Cleveland Public Library. And in December of 1890, Dorothy Catherine was born, and she's there as a baby on the far left. And I included some other photos here. By the 1884, the Chesnuts had settled in Cleveland, and all 4 children would attend Central High School there. And so here's Dorothy as a baby. Here's Dorothy in 1909, taking the classical course. You can see this is her yearbook picture. And then finally on the far right, in 1914 as a college senior at Western Reserve. In September of 1893, Ethel and Helen entered Central High School, and both took the classical course. In fact, all 3 girls did. After high school graduation, Western Reserve University was the first college considered by the family, but Charles and Susan found the girls acting disillusioned and dispirited. After inquiry, they learned that a student at Central had told the sisters, quote, "After all, you are Negroes. We know that you are nice girls and everybody thinks the world of you. But mother says that while it was all right for us to go together when we were younger, now that we are growing up, we must consider society and we can't just go together anymore." That's when Charles and Susan decided on Smith College, Charles had visited Northampton in March of 1889 at the invitation of his friend, the writer George Washington Cable, and he had liked the small town. With trunks of beautiful clothes described by Helen as, quote, "shally dressing sacks with flutings of gay ribbon all round them, lounging robes of French flannel and eiderdown, dresses, the skirts of which were lined with silk and interlined with horsehair and edged with brush braid to stand the wear as they swept along the sidewalk, braids and buttons and bands for trimming, leg of mutton sleeves, collars heavily boned to stand up straight behind the ears. These filled the wardrobe with beauty and the hearts of the girls with joy." And with these things, the two girls arrived at Smith in the fall of 1897. Their parents, as Helen recalled, quote, "were both going to college along with their daughters," end of quote. And soon after, on September 30th, 1897, Charles advised Ethel, quote, "remember that you are there not only to have fun, but to study and prepare yourselves for future usefulness," end of quote. Now, documents from Smith College archives show us that Helen and Ethel took 4 years of Latin and 1 year of Greek. Ethel also took courses in French and German. Helen took courses in French and Italian. Their stay at Smith was not without trouble. A diary notation by Professor Mary Augusta Jordan, dated January 9th, 1899, tells us all was not well. Jordan was one of Smith's leading English professors and was not afraid to voice her opinion. Quote, "Then I had a sad interview with the younger Miss Chesnut," that's Helen. "They are experiencing the color line in a place where they ought to be secure. I appealed to the president, who proposes to take a hand himself," end of quote. The president mentioned was L. Clark Seeley, and we don't know the outcome. There's no mention of the incident in his papers. We do know that Helen and Ethel had 4 different residences during their years at Smith. And about this, Nancy Young, chief archivist at Smith College, told me, quote, "while boarding students off campus was not unusual at this time, I do think that it is unusual to have students reside in 4 different places over 4 years. Whether the color line the Chesnuts were experiencing was within the Smith community or the town community, I'm afraid I can't determine," end of quote. Letters home reveal that the girls were concerned with social activities. Their father, the man who had spent much time in his youth teaching himself Latin, jestingly told Helen in a letter dated February 28th, 1898, quote, "It pains me to learn that you haven't time to learn how to ski." He spells it S-K-E-E. "I haven't the faintest idea of what skiing is, but it is a keen disappointment to me that you don't learn everything in the curriculum. Can't you take up skiing in your 2nd or 3rd year? Is it harder or easier than Latin?" End of quote. In October 12th, 1900, the senior Chesnuts, their parents, met the parents of Julia Harwood Carverno, who would rise from instructor to professor of Greek at Smith College, at the home of family friends, the Amblers. The first Black student to graduate from Smith College, Otelia Cromwell, had lived in Carverno's home for 2 years, along with one other student, Inez Wiggins. Carverno was the only woman on the founding committee of Kane in 1905, and in 1926 to 1927, she was Kane's president. Just splendid connection to us today, I think. About the Carvernos, Charles wrote to his daughters, quote, "They expressed their intention of looking you up or hoping to see you in Northampton. I hope you may meet them, as they are very nice people," end of quote. Not long after, Helen suffered a bout of severe eye strain. This was 1901, and she returned home to Cleveland. After 6 weeks at a normal high school there, learning how to teach, she went to Baltimore to teach English for a short time at a colored high school. And then in March, she returned to Smith to finish her degree. In 1902, her sister Ethel married Edward Christopher Williams. The wedding was held at the Chesnut home at 64 Brenton Street in Cleveland. Reverend Wilson Steerley, rector of the Emmanuel Episcopal Church, which was a white church, officiated. Edward Williams trained as a librarian and is considered today to be the first professionally trained Black librarian. He was principal of the M Street School in Washington, D.C., and later in 1916 became librarian at Howard University. At the same time, he was also the chair of Romance languages there, in which he taught German. And between 1925 and 26, he published as a serial in the Messenger magazine an epistolary novel of the Harlem Renaissance titled When Washington Was in Vogue. He also published a small essay titled Latin Again in the Howard Record. Helen's interests were stellar, shall we say. In 1901, she was a senior member of the Telescopian Society at Smith, which was the group interested in astronomy at the college. In 1902, between 1902 and 1904, Helen began her teaching career as a substitute teacher at Central High School. In 1905, she taught biology, and in 1910, she moved to algebra and Latin. Now, Central High School was not only Cleveland's oldest school, it was the first free public high school west of the Allegheny Mountains. College prep work was its focus, and in 1918, for example, the school had 4 full-time Latin teachers. Her sister Ethel had also been teaching at William Hooper Council School, which is now Alabama AME University. And she was an instructor of Latin and English from 1905 to 1906. Council had been born in slavery in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and was sold south to Alabama, where he had seen 2 of his brothers auctioned away in 1857, never to see them again. He dedicated his life to his school. The Williams were a dynamic couple, and in December of 1903, they gave a reception for W.E.B. Du Bois at their Cleveland home, 71 Elberon Avenue. And in 1906, the Cleveland Gazette announced that Ethel had, quote, earned a literary reputation in her own right. She is the author of some very meritorious poems, which have been published here and there in a number of magazines and newspapers, end of quote. I haven't found them, so that's a research project for somebody. 9719 Lamont Avenue was the Chesnut family home from 1904 to 1936. It was a spacious and book-filled house. And Helen, who's there to your left, was a serious gardener. Here she is holding a garden hose, watering perhaps to her right, the garden of 3,000 tulips that the Cleveland Gazette said she had planted in 1916. Her sister, Dorothy, younger by 11 years, also studied classical and modern languages, but not at Smith. She did her work at Western Reserve University. And here she is dressed as the goddess Themis at Western Reserve in May of 1911. After Dorothy's graduation from Western Reserve's College for Women, Charles wanted Ethel's husband, Edward, to help her get a position at the Dunbar High School, the M School, the famous school in Washington, D.C. but she did not like Washington and she returned home to Cleveland. She then worked in the probate court for 2 years and then moved on to teach French, Latin, and English at Wilson Junior High School in Cleveland. In the summer of 1921, she did some graduate work at the University of Chicago. In March of 1924, she married John Slade, who had trained at Howard University's medical school. And they had a son, John Chesnut Slade. They resided nearby the senior Chesnuts in Cleveland. Between 1914 and 1919, Helen was regularly mentioned in the Cleveland Gazette as one of the race women teaching in Cleveland schools. The columnist Alexander Taylor, who mentored her over the years, wrote on September 21st, 1918, quote, "Our citizens of Cleveland have reason to feel proud of the splendid recognition given our girls as teachers in the mixed schools of the city, regardless of color. We have 55 race girls and women teaching. Cleveland can rightfully claim to be the banner city in this respect," end of quote. In October of 1919, Taylor penned a similar piece for the Gazette, mentioning 63 race women by name who were teaching in the mixed public schools. In 1910, Helen suffered digestive trouble, severe. And that summer, Booker T. Washington, who was a longtime friend of the Chesnut family, invited her to stay at his home, the Oaks, on the campus of the Tuskegee Institute. Helen's brother Edwin had begun working as Washington's secretary that same year. And with her interest in astronomy, she must have been especially thrilled when she saw Halley's Comet flying through the Alabama skies. She resumed teaching at Central High School, and in January of 1913, the Olympian Club for Latin students put on a play titled, quote, "The Roman Schoolhouse." And the Central High School Monthly reported that, quote, "The Cicero students took much pleasure in the flogging of Catiline." She was also working with the Girls Literary Society that year, too. During this decade, she set up the Home Garden Club. And here in this photo is the club in 1919 with one of her most famous pupils, Langston Hughes. He's in the front row on the left, 4 people in, and she is above his left shoulder in the middle of the group. But there were other talented students, such as little Robert Coleman, the 14-year-old class Victorian in 1930. Helen was quoted in the Pittsburgh Courier in June of 1930 saying, quote, "Robert is one of the most remarkable boys I have ever taught. Latin and mathematics, which are usually the most difficult subjects to teach, are his favorites. He seems to grasp the most complicated assignments with amazing swiftness. To me, he is a genius," end of quote. In the summer of 1921, Helen taught Latin at the Foreign Language School at Western Reserve University. In January of 1923, she gave a party for the senior high school women teaching at Central High. The party started at 4 p.m. There were 32 guests. There was music by the high school orchestra and supper. Then in her early 40s, she entered the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Columbia University. And on October 28, 1925, she graduated with an MA degree in Latin. She was 2 months from her 45th birthday. We do not know who her professors were, but on the staff at the time were Grace Goodale, Frank Moore, Gertrude Hurst, Nelson McCree, Eugene Strittmatter, C.J. Keyes, William Westerman, Charles Knapp, William Oldfather, and Moses Haddis. She had joined the American Philological Association 5 years before in 1920 and was on the group's executive committee in 1920. She remained a member until 1934, and it is quite likely that she is the first Black woman to join the APA. In 1925, Helen published an article in the School Review titled "The Story of the Fasces at Central High School." In it, she described her students' interest in the Fasces on the US dime and how her students had drafted a letter on the chalkboard to send to A.A. Weinman, the coin's designer. They were thrilled when he replied to them. Helen wrote, quote, "Then the Olympian Club, composed of 11th and 12th grade students, acquired a romantic and thrilling interest in the beauty and significance of the Fasces and decided to adopt it for its symbol," end of quote. With the parents' help, the students made a life-size model of it and put it up on a classroom wall. They decided that new initiates into the Olympian Club would have to wear pins of miniature Fasces and that they would make them out of twine, gold-colored safety pins, and twigs. These little pins and the club were wildly popular, and Helen noted, quote, "One little boy from the junior high school came in to ask, 'How long does a fella have to take Latin before he can wear one of those things?'" End of quote. Helen's principal suggested that the club make 200 of the pins. Nothing succeeds like success, yes? Make 200 pins, quote, "to send as souvenirs to the members of the Ohio Latin Conference, which was soon to meet at Oberlin," end of quote. At the end of 2 weeks of hard work, Helen said 200 little Fasces had been made. They were tagged with ribbon that said "Compliments of the Olympian Club, Central High School," and packed into a 5-pound candy box for shipment to Oberlin, end of quote. Some 50 years later, a friend of Langston Hughes, Rowena Jelliff, recalled Central High School as, quote, "quite an extraordinary place, having an unusually competent group of people. There was Helen Chesnutt's excitement, even in the teaching of Latin, which made her classes something that everybody wanted to get into," end of quote. In November of 1927, she suffered a ruptured appendix and was rushed to the Cleveland Clinic. Peritonitis set in and she was very sick. She was back in the hospital in June of 1928, but with her health restored, she sailed to Europe in July of 1929 with her friend and fellow teacher, Alta Myrtle Bean. She's there on the left in her college picture, and stayed until September. Their ship came back to port on September 9th of that 1929. And the slide to the right shows Alta Bean. She's second from the left corner, and that's Helen's sitting there, their heads sort of tilted towards each other. And the faculty is identified below, you can check. January of 1931, Helen published Ecce Virgilius in the Classical Journal, in which she described how her students had celebrated the bimillennium of Virgil's birth by putting on an elaborate production of Frank Miller's 1909 play, Dido, the Phoenician Queen. In 1932, she co-authored with Martha Taylor Whittier Olivenbaum and Nellie Lucille Price Rosebaugh a beginning Latin textbook titled The Road to Latin with the John C. Winston Company, which was edited by Emile de Sauzet, director of the foreign languages of the Cleveland Board of Education. The Road to Latin received favorable reviews, at least 2 of them that I found. Dorrance White of the University of Iowa in Classical Journal wrote, quote, "The subject matter is cleverly chosen and is cleverly arranged. It affords an excellent medium for teaching Roman private life, legend, myth, and history. It has in mind the people who can take only 1 year and would like to get the most out of his Latin study. Despite several blemishes, the reviewer would place it among the few leading first-year Latin textbooks, end of quote. B.W. Mitchell, in an issue of Classical Weekly, wrote, quote, "The book supplies a very adequate road, paved solidly and smoothly. There are no detours and no aimless wanderings," end of quote. The book was published again in subsequent years, 1938, 1945, and 1949, or so it seems, because I have only been able to see the 1932 and the 1949 versions. So I don't know if they're reprintings or they're additions per se. Helen's co-authors, again, co-authors, it's not just Helen's book, were Nellie Lucille Price Rosebaugh. Here in this photograph, in a student at Central High School in 1914, whom Helen must have met at the time. You can see she's studying classical Greek. Nellie went on to earn a BA at Western Reserve University's College for Women in June of 1918 and an MA from the same school in 1942. Martha Taylor Whittier Olivenbaum graduated from the University of Wisconsin in 1904 with a thesis titled "The Influence of Politics Upon Art in Athens," and then in 1906 earned an MA degree at Ewing College. The book, nearly 500 pages in length, at least the 1932 edition is very well illustrated. And here's just a sample page. Suffice it to say, a full analysis of the book has yet to be made. Here you can see a kind mistress on the right and her female attendants doing various things in their home. Here's an advertisement from 1932 in Auxilium Latinum, a publication from Brooklyn, New York, listing Chesnut, Olivenbaum, and Rosebaugh as the authors and boasting of the 250 illustrations in the book. Let's see this there. In 1935, John Winston issued a companion volume titled "A Workbook to Accompany the Road to Latin." And it's mentioned down here in this middle photo, a workbook to accompany the road to Latin. It was prepared by Virginia Gatch Markham, who had earned an MA from the University of Chicago and taught in Cleveland from 1930 to 1963. Emile de Sauzet was the editor, and there is no mention of the other authors. But the three women were back together again in 1940, writing the Cleveland Plan for teaching of foreign languages with special references to Latin, which is on your right. And I am obliged to Nick Young at the University of Detroit Jesuit High School and Academy for giving me the copy of this special manual that I treasure. I have it in special archival paper. The Classical Association of the Middle West and South membership list for 1936 included 3 of the aforementioned women, Rosebaugh, Markham, and Chesnut. Olivenbaum's name is the only one not there. Helen had been a member of the association at that point since 1917. Helen's family was starting to shrink. Her brother-in-law, Edward Williams, had died in 1929. Her father died in 1932. Her brother Edwin, who had earned his BA at Harvard and a DDS, a dental degree at Northwestern University, had died in 1939. And her mother died soon after in 1940. She was still teaching at Central High School in 1943 with 3 other Latin teachers, Sylvia Excel, Juanita C. Williams, and Helen M. Gates. but she retired not too long after, which is mentioned by Langston Hughes in one of his newspaper columns in 1946. Let's see. There. She began working on a biography of her father, Charles Waddell Chesnut, pioneer of the color line, which was published in 1952 by the University of North Carolina Press. And in November of the same year, she was at the Festival of Music at Fisk University in Nashville, leading a seminar with Sterling Brown about her father's work. In 1959, just the photo on the right, she helped set up a special exhibit about her father at the Cleveland Public Library. Amid these activities in the decade of the 50s, she lost both of her sisters. At some point, she moved into the Margaret Wagner House, a home for seniors, which had opened in Cleveland in 1961. Sandra Everett, who met Helen in 1967, sent me this account only a few weeks ago. She wrote, "When I was a young librarian at the Cleveland Public Library, I was employed in what was then a department that served those outside normal library usage, i.e. the hospitalized, the blind, the prisoners, and shut-ins. Miss Chesnut lived at the Margaret Wagner House in Cleveland Heights and was a regular borrower of the few books in Latin that the library owned. She read them over and over and seemed never to tire of them. One day when I visited, she was so excited to tell me that Langston Hughes had sent her the book titled Best Short Stories by Negro Writers, which he had edited, and that her father's story was the first chapter. I was surprised to learn he had been her student. I do remember being shocked the day she told me about the short stories book, because I had known her for over a year at that point and had no idea she considered herself to be of African descent. I am pretty sure she mentioned having written a Latin textbook, but not a biography of her father. I had never heard of him, but I must have, quote, looked him up immediately. I mostly remember her being a lovely and very proper sort of lady with white hair." Helen died on Thursday, August 7th, 1969, at the Margaret Wagner House. Her funeral, as was her sister's, was held at Ohio's leading African-American funeral company, the House of Wills, still standing. The firm's building in Cleveland was very elaborate. It once had a Grecian temple inside, and here we can see the remaining Egyptian slumber room, both suggesting connections to ideas of pre-Christian immortality. Helen's body was buried with members of her family in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. In January of 1881, Helen's father recorded in his diary a conversation he had had with a former slave named Robert Hill in Fayetteville. Hill had been talking with John McLaughlin, a poor white man who worked as a clerk in a local store and who was curious about the mysterious Chesnut. "What kind of fellow is this here Chesnut? What kind of education has he? Does he think he's as good as a white man?" Hill replied, "Every bit of it, sir." And then Hill brought up the idea of, quote, the equality of intelligence. This was beyond McLaughlin's comprehension at the time, but it speaks volumes to us today. Equality of intelligence was clearly the Chesnut family's operant principle. They were, except for Edwin, a family of teachers. We should, I think, take a lesson from Helen and her family and take that principle into our own classics classrooms. Hats off to Helen and to Martha and to Nellie. Thank you. Yeah, I can't hear you. Anyone have questions? Will we do that? Have questions, Teresa?
Rebecca, yes, let's take one question.
Okay, yeah. So if you have a question, you want to put it in the question and answer, but I have one. And so I was wondering if you had thought about, because I know you looked at William Scarborough's Greek book, if you would think about revisiting Helen's Latin book at all.
Here's
Yes.
Scarborough's Greek book. I managed to get that back in print, which is well needed because there are only 9 copies left in the world. One of them is at Frederick Douglass's house. Yeah, no, of course I thought about that. My preoccupation, however, has always been Will Scarborough. But as I, learned about Scarborough, that's when I found Helen and also the other members of my photo installation. But yeah, this book and Helen's book, actually Helen, Nellie's, and Martha's book, because there's no way of knowing who did what. There's
Right.
we don't even have publication records. We know 1,000 copies of this were published because Scarborough describes it in his autobiography. Unless we find an archive of publication materials for John Winston telling us how this happened, and also how it happened that Virginia Markham did the workbook, and then the 3 women are back together doing the handbook. How that all worked, I don't know. I do think Western Reserve University is where they interacted. But yes, no, it'd be a swell idea, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There's another question about how do you know how widespread the use of the Road to Latin was at all?
No, that's what I'm saying about
Yeah.
if you're doing what is really formally called the history of the book, which done well is an arduous effort in librarianship and archival reconstruction, you'd have to find out the sales list. You'd also, and it's sad to say, libraries have pitched their books over time and they eliminate things from the catalog. At one point, we might have been able to go through school catalogs across the country and see, oh, it's in Springfield, it's in Hartford, it's in New Haven, it's also out in California. But those records are just, somebody could do it, possibly, but I don't know. I don't know what we'd turn up. It would be fascinating. I just discovered recently, we do not know who the first woman is to write a Latin textbook, period, in the United States. I have found one who wrote with a man, 1898, and then I found some in the 20s and 30s. But why not a nice MA thesis on that?
Yeah, it seems like an important issue.
Yeah, how do we do the history right without these benchmarks to measure achievement and interest? So yeah, does that help answer your question? I hope.
Yes, I think so, and I hope it answers Sky Shirley's question as well. Teresa, for time, do you want to move forward? Or
I see one more question in the Q&A. Go ahead and take that one.
Okay. So this is from G. Goodman. Do we have any information on the relationship between Chesnut, Olivenbaum, and Rosenbaugh, other than as teachers in Ohio? Is this something that happened at Case Western?
Oh, no, I mean, I don't have any more information on that. I mean, for example, Virginia Markham's papers, they're out somewhere in Kansas in an archive. And in COVID time, how are you going to get into an archive? You're really not. I mean, unless you pay someone to microfilm, which can cost hundreds of dollars. So the evidence may be in an archive, in a shoebox, in the attic, in a trunk. We don't know. But now that you know who these people are, if you see it, you'll know what you have.
Right.
I'm sure Scarborough's textbook, for example, it just said William Scarborough. It didn't say anything, except for saying Wilberforce. If you didn't know what Wilberforce was, you probably thought this was a hideous old Greek textbook. Throw it on the nickel bookshelf. We don't care. And the same way too, you see Helen Chesnut, it doesn't say, and my father was a famous novelist and I went to Smith. I mean, it doesn't say that. So if you don't know what you're looking at, you could throw a diamond right in the trash.
Right. And luckily, I think it looks like the Road to Latin anyway is now on Google Books, and I was happy to see that. But
yeah, the 32 edition is.
Yeah.
The first, the original. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And
I'm sure there's more to find, Rebecca. I'm sure there's more to find.
right, yeah, hopefully sooner than later. But I think the rest of our comments are thank yous, many thank yous, and I add my thanks to you as well. It was really great.
Good. I'm glad. This is a tremendous amount. This may look simple. This stuff is spear one territory. I feel like a warrior.
Well, thank you so much, Michele, for that elucidating talk. Fantastic talk. I see so many great comments coming across the wire too on how much people have enjoyed this. And now I'll turn things over to Peter Barrios Lech, who will say a few words about the scholarship itself. Peter is Associate Professor of Classics and Director of the Master's Program in Latin and Classical Humanities at UMass Boston. And he served this year as chair of the Kane Ad Hoc Scholarship Committee that developed this award. Peter. Peter, you may be muted. Technology.
I am so sorry about that. How about now? Better? All right, great. Technology, it often doesn't cooperate, right? Well, it's really an honor on behalf of the Ad Hoc Committee to present the Helen Maria Chesnut Scholarship for Equity in Classical Study. This is intended for students at the undergraduate and graduate level who have historically been underrepresented in the discipline, and it is to study topics that are not or have not been traditionally the focus of study in the discipline. We are going to open up applications soon. Recipients of the scholarship will be able to sit on future selection committees. And I'm happy to take any questions if there's time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Peter, is it restricted to people just living in New England?
Yes, thank you. Yes, to people living in New England.
Living or studying, I believe, correct?
Correct. Yeah, because these days you can study at an institution in New England, but not necessarily be in New England.
Right.
So we have to keep this in mind too.
True, too.
Yes, the application is forthcoming. I see some comments. Thank you, Ruth.
How many are you going to give, Peter?
At least one. At least one. We have $4,000 to award. It depends on the applicants and the nature of their project.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for making that announcement. And I just encourage, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say also, thank you, Roger, for the correction. I'd like to thank Craig Vandeveer, Carol Morris, Charles Morris, and Colleen Morris for allowing us to honor Helen in this way.
Are they there, Peter?
I know Craig is there.
Craig, hi.
If Craig would like to say something, can he be given the ability to appear, Emma, or?
Hi, Carol.
Carol's here. Yes, great. Well,
He's
Yeah,
there
so-
muted.
right.
I'm promoting them. One second.
Can you
Okay,
hear me now? How about, there we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. This has really been very, very interesting. We've actually, I know I've learned even more about my family. As you probably know, Helen was my great aunt. My great grandmother was Ethel, and she was married to Edward. But my brothers and sisters and I, we were very excited about this opportunity, and really appreciate, I guess, Peter and whomever you had in Cleveland search for us through ancestry.com. That was pretty cool how that all kind of worked out. So we really appreciate being included in this.
well,
Craig,
thank
can
you
I
for
ask
being
you,
here.
Craig, can I ask you a question?
Please.
Joseph Beeman, Ethel's second husband? I couldn't find anything on that aspect after E.C. Williams died. She's Mrs. Joseph Beeman in the funeral notices that I found, and I just wondered who that was.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure either. I have no information. I have not at least found any information at this point.
Another mystery for us. We'll have
Yeah.
to do this next year with
Right.
Helen Chesnut Part 2. How about that?
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Craig. And again, thank you, Dr. Ronick, for your wonderful talk. Thank you, Peter, for your work with the committee. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing with us your connections to her through Smith College. And I just encourage everyone to note that we have a closing award ceremony starting momentarily, and I welcome you all to that. So with that, farewell. Thank you very much.
Thank you.